Thank you very much. Let me start by saying how excited I am to be here. You know, it's actually, for us who love maps, maybe, we should get together more often because there are not enough of these types of events. It's really great talking with many of you in the break about maps and nothing but maps. I've personally loved maps since I was about 6 when my dad bought me a globe. We used to play this game where he would say the name of a country and would, you know the game, right? You swivel the globe around, you point at the country. Where's Togo? You look for Togo, there it is. Since that day, on my 6th birthday, I've been in love with maps. That's why I went on to study geography and then GIS. Then I worked for TomTom, Ordnance Survey, Transport for London, and here. And actually, living in Berlin is particularly exciting for a geographer. Let me show you one of the reasons why I find it really exciting living here. Tell me, anyone see anything interesting about this map of the Berlin tram network? Yeah, east and west, exactly. It's absolutely amazing that a city is built in such a way where for the whole period of multiple decades, it was completely divided. There are places where there are literally schools directly next to each other in Neukölln with big sports facilities next to each other. I mean, no city would do that in its right mind, put 2 almost identical schools right next to each other. Well, the reason is, of course, the wall was there. So I took this map and I actually drew the wall on, and you can see it there. That's where the wall was. And only now are we starting to see the encroachment of the public transit network back into the west with a recent extension of the tram to Hauptbahnhof. So this is really one of the many reasons why I find living in Berlin really fascinating from a geographical perspective. Maps have evolved a lot in the last 30 years. We've talked a lot about that in the last presentations. And I don't know, but many of you probably remember that digital maps 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, were largely made up of nodes and links, roads primarily, and a little bit of infrastructure. And nothing much more than that, right? Then we started adding land covers, beautiful colors started to come in, pedestrian networks, 3D landmarks, a lot of richness started to come into the map. But even today, we still see some maps that look a little bit like this, right? A lot of nodes and links. This is actually a website of Macmillan, who Millikan, who was making a lot of reviews about handheld devices back in the early 2000s. This is what they looked like back then. So again, maps have evolved enormously since those days. But still today, there remain some question marks about spaces between roads. And so when I look back at the history of the company that I work for right now here, we've been monitoring that very carefully and looking at the use cases. What do people really need? And these days, with the enormous explosion in terms of capabilities, what we have in our pockets, these smartphones, it opens up a lot of new opportunities, no longer about just richness in the map. You need fundamentally to re-examine the business models and then to add more data to meet those new use cases. One of those, of course, is about indoor maps. But it's more than just indoor maps. Yes, it's about shopping centers. It's about airports. It's also about train stations. Sure, they're all indoor maps. But it's also about things like zoos. I mean, how many times have you been to the zoo and got lost? Well, maybe my sense of geography is actually really bad, which is why I like maps, but it's happened to me. I imagine it's happened to many of us. Also, at a theme park. So these are also locations of hyperlocal geographical information that have so far not really been mapped very well, right? So that is one thing that my team at here is doing, is we are mapping these last remaining gaps in our maps. And that's why we don't call it indoor maps, we call it venue maps. Venue maps is needed in a number of different areas. I mentioned consumers. I mean, we all carry around with us a device now that is capable of doing all of these things that a computer was not even capable of doing 10 years ago. It's amazing. So consumers will, of course, continually expect to see this advanced level of cartographic detail in the maps. That's going to continue. But also enterprises. And I'm going to show a few examples in a minute of how enterprises are going to be demanding these kind of maps in the future. And then also automotive players for the last mile to get you not just to the car park, but also all the way through to your final destination inside of the building. The industry is growing. We've mentioned indoor many, many times today throughout the presentations. And it is growing, and that's very well recognized. I mean, ABI have mentioned 4 billion is what the industry will be worth by 2018. And 1.6 billion of that in the USA alone will be spent on exactly what my team is actually building, which is, the software and the hardware that enables these different things. But also consumers are asking more and more for indoor maps. You can see from Google Trends the number of people who are doing a search on the internet for the words indoor maps. And it's also going up very quickly. So clearly this is an area, and that's why we say the next frontier. We think this is going to be the next big thing in mapping, and it already is in many ways, but I think this is just the tip of the iceberg for the many reasons that we've mentioned. There are still a lot of friction points that need to be corrected and improved in order to really be able to accelerate on this. Let's take a few examples of some of the business drivers and reasons why different venues and companies are looking at indoor maps. Travel trends, airports and train stations. 41% of us, when we travel, we struggle to find our way around foreign airports. That's according to CPP research. And 20% of us have had to run at some point in our lives to catch a flight. Okay? I'm also one of those. So it is very well understood that when time is tight and instructions and signposts are not clear, in those locations, the need for indoor maps is particularly high. And that's where we're seeing the initial trends of demand in those hubs, those transit hubs, for example. And that's going to continue. Airports have got KPIs, key performance indicators, around throughput, and they need to make sure that they identify bottlenecks. So not only is it used for navigation, for us, for consumers, it's also used for the airport in order to identify bottlenecks and be able to optimize, improve the signposts for those who don't have smartphones, but also to improve the smartphone apps and to improve the ability for people to use them. Because many times people don't even know those apps exist, right? So we need to improve a lot of things in this industry to really get people used to the fact that this is possible. Retail is another one, right? It comes up a lot. I mean, I personally dream of the idea that one day I'll be able to, if I run out of paint when I'm painting my walls in my apartment, to be able to take my phone and just scan the barcode on the tub of the paint, if I've run out of paint, and find my nearest store that stocks that paint. And then get instructions all the way to the store, right the way to the aisle. You know what it's like when you arrive in one of these big DIY shops. There's no one to ask. They're all busy. There's 2 or 3 people waiting. That's not the way. And that's exactly why 73% of shoppers these days prefer to consult their mobile phone rather than ask someone in the store. And we know that also retailers are now competing very much with the online retail world. And that's a very, very, very tight battle that they're fighting, but they're starting to fight back very nicely. Actually, something like a quarter of all John Lewis customers, John Lewis being the equivalent of someone like Galeria Kaufhof, big department store in the UK, a quarter of their customers now do the opposite of what you'd expect. They don't do showrooming. No, they do the opposite. They research online and then they buy offline. And retailers are increasingly offering these omni-channel retailing possibilities where they offer more options for you to get hold of the goods, pick them up from your local store rather than having to order them and get them 2 or 3 days later. So much more flexibility. And the online retailers can't offer that. They have a few warehouses around the country, and that's it. Retailers have multiple branches in every single district of the city. So that's their advantage, and they're using that very well. So that's another area where indoor maps are really very useful for identifying the products on the shelves And that's another area where we're seeing that taking off, but also to understand behavior inside of shops. So if there's dwell time around the jeans section and then that person wanders off and doesn't make a purchase, well, that's not too smart. So at that moment, you can target that customer, obviously on an opt-in basis, so they have to actually choose to be part of this. But then you can notify them, hey, why don't you buy 2 pairs of jeans and we'll give you a third one for free, right? So they make a purchase that they might not otherwise make, and everybody's happy. These types of things one day will for sure, and already today, some retailers in the United States are making good progress with this type of really highly targeted understanding of their customers to offer them a really personalized experience which they buy into and they understand. So that's another area where we're really seeing a lot of interest in indoor maps, and that's going to continue, no doubt. How many people have ever got lost at a hospital? It's very easy to do. Most hospitals are very confusing. They've evolved over many decades, and rooms and facilities have been moved around. That's why something like 7 million hospital appointments are missed in the United Kingdom every single year, right? And that costs something like 1 billion Great British pounds. That's a huge amount of money wasted, and the vast majority of those missed appointments are due to navigation problems. I mean, these are not my words. This is from The Guardian, one of the leading UK newspapers, and also from the Wall Street Journal. Same problem in the United States. So this is another area where indoor maps are not only going to help with navigation, but also to help track what goes on in the hospital, right? That's where it starts getting a little bit into the privacy areas, which I know is a very hot topic, particularly in Germany, but generally in Europe and somewhat in the United States too. But you could imagine what you could do. For example, you could, if there's only a certain number of dialysis machines in the hospital, you could track where they are. If there's only a certain number of surgeons on duty, you could know where the nearest one is in case of an emergency. You could monitor how often do people pass the location where they clean their hands. All these things are already, by the way, being done in the United States on a trial basis, and maybe one day will also come to Europe as a way to optimize the use of resources in hospitals. I'm personally particularly excited about the navigation side because I really hate getting lost in hospitals. Thank heavens it doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, it really matters, and it really makes a big difference that you get good instructions when it counts the most. The slide got a bit messed up, but I think you can see the main points here. This is about the automotive industry. So no longer is it acceptable when you park your car to find your way in to your final destination. That's no longer something that consumers find acceptable. We're hearing that increasingly. So what they expect is for the instructions to continue right the way through to their final destination, right? And that is not the car park. That is where they're going. So we're seeing a big uptake by mainly the biggest automotive players of these so-called companion apps, right? Companion apps which may come from Audi, from BMW, or from the car manufacturer themselves. And they typically have a mapping feature. You can see the one here from BMW. They've called it last mile, right? The last mile feature, which does exactly what I've mentioned. It doesn't yet include indoor maps, though. So this is another area where we're seeing a strong potential for indoor maps. Garmin, who will be speaking in a few minutes, they've already closed the last mile to some extent. You can see the screenshot here. They're using our venue maps to show which floor your final destination is on, so that when you arrive at the mall, you get routed, you get the instructions, at least, to the final destination. But also, they do more than that. They also route you to the correct entrance of the shopping mall, which, particularly in the United States, but also to some extent in Europe, makes a big difference. These massive shopping malls, where if you get to the wrong entrance, you might well end up fighting through crowds for 15 minutes to get to your final destination, which may well have its own car park right next to it. So this is all about optimization, but very valid and a very big market, because most of us have been in a car, every month, several times, probably even every day. So this is a very big area as well for us. Then there are also legislation changes that are going to impact the uptake of indoor maps. for example, in the United States again, where things really are moving quickly on indoor maps, the FCC has recently extended the E911 directive to include indoor. So I don't know how many of you know that, but in January they extended it. It's no longer just good enough for mobile operators if you dial 911 to know where you are outdoors. No, that's not enough. They also want you to be able to pinpoint where the caller is indoors. So mobile network operators have to be able to pinpoint you indoors if you call an emergency service number from your mobile phone. That is amazing that legislation is demanding that. And it is entirely possible. The ingredients are there on the table to do that today. So that is extremely exciting for anybody who's interested in maps, because maps are what's going to enable this. So it's about floor number, and it's about showing on that map where the caller is. It's going to save lives, right? Because if someone calls, says someone's having a heart attack in a big shopping center, it can take minutes, even tens of minutes to find the person if you don't have their location on a map. And that can mean the difference between life and death. This is many reasons why our team has started to build venue maps. And we started back in 2011, so this is not a new initiative. We've been working on it for almost 5 years. And you can see how seriously we've been taking it. We've now got something like 13,000 venues around the world, 12,751, and you can see the split around the world. Global coverage available in GML, and it is industrially captured, so we've actually surveyed it using the same kind of procedures that we do for the outdoor maps. And then we've also added routing graphs, which means that you can now perform routes as well using our venue maps, which is pretty important. You can access the data through an API and through an SDK, and let me show you a quick video of how it works. So this is the route planning that we've got. If it wants to start. It was working a second ago. That's our lovely logo. Let's see. Okay. So this is brand new. The Here mobile SDK will be adding route planning this winter. So you can see here, I've done a little video showing a shopping mall here in Berlin. You can see the map in 2D, but you can also see it in 3D. And this is all available online and offline. So even if you're in another country, you don't need a mobile network to use this. Seamless connection to the outdoor world, of course, from the indoor world. And then back to not just a venue, but a private venue. So if you have a location that you don't want anyone to see, only users of your own application, that's possible. This is our office here in Berlin on Invalidenstraße. And you can see the 5th floor right there, which is next to where I sit. There's a meeting room. You can see the nice 3D route all the way through the building to your final destination. This is all possible today. You can get access to the SDK. If you talk to me nicely, I can give you early access. That's available today. So I've told you why I love maps. I've told you what the company that I work for does with maps. And I've told you about different areas where I feel that indoor maps are going to take off. And really, that this is just the very beginning. But it's going to be very big. And all of us, I imagine there'll be a lot more discussions about this in the next year's session as well. So many, many thanks. And once again, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for listening. If you've got any questions, be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Thanks for the invitation to speak nicely to you. Are there any questions in the audience? Here's a question.
Hi, just a quick question. How do you keep the data fresh, and how do you actually create your maps? Do you license them from other map vendors, or do you actually drive or send someone there?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, because with all of this stuff, what we're finding is that indoor locations change roughly 30% per year. The outdoor streets change roughly 15% a year. So it's a double the pace of change. So we have, of course, as a business, one big advantage, which is that we've got 200 field offices in over 55 countries, and a lot of those staff also are responsible for the neighboring countries. So we have 200 field offices, and mostly we have the ability to go to a venue to check what has changed in person. If that is not possible, and that is increasingly something that we're looking to do, we establish a direct relationship with the venue owner. So that is ideal, because then you don't need to go there, because the venue owner is giving you that information on a regular basis. We've built a tool where a venue owner can actually log in and they can make a change, for example, a Burger King to a McDonald's. And within 15 minutes, it's reflected in our API. So anybody who's using the SDK or the API get access to that change instantaneously. So all of our apps, including our Here Maps application itself, which you can download on the Google Play Store for Android, that includes the venue maps as well. And they're updated within 15 minutes as we make the change or as one of our venue owners logs in and makes the change. So there's multiple ways that we do that, but we're very keen on doing more of that, what I've just described, establishing a direct relationship with the venue owner so that they make the change. And of course, if you think a shopping mall, why is a shopping mall interested in working with us? It all comes back to the automotive side. Here is primarily serving the automotive industry today. Vast majority of our revenue comes from automotive. So, and the reason is that 9 out of 10 cars today drive with a Here map on board if they have a GPS navigation system, and those retailers want to be in the map because it allows consumers to find the stores. So it all comes back to that. So the shopping malls, as soon as they hear that they have an opportunity to update and maintain the data with a 15-minute cycle